Welcome to R&R Living Life. We start this episode having left Ballara Station and reached the Northwest Coastal Highway where we had pulled over in a rest stop. We were now in the Pilbara, a very large and sparsely populated region of Western Australia, twice the size of the United Kingdom, with its ancient natural landscapes dating back 3.5 to 4.3 billion years. The Pilbara covers an area of approximately 507,900 square miles and contains some of Earth's oldest rock formations, as well as landscapes of coastal plains and mountain ranges with cliffs and gorges. Predominantly red earth, with vast mineral deposits, in particular iron ore, and also a global biodiversity hotspot for animal species that have adapted to live in underground caves found in the region, with many yet to be discovered due to the difficulties associated with the complexity of exploring underground environments. We were travelling along the western edge of the Ashburton Shire with country that was ever changing, with something to look at on both sides of the road. The rocky outcrops that sprouted out of nowhere were intriguing, as were the massive ranges in the distance. We stopped and stretched our legs at Barradale Rest Area on the Yanari River, where there was once a roadhouse, but all that remains are a few curbstones and some concrete driveways. The Ashburton River rises approximately 100 kilometres south of Newman and flows in a west-northwesterly direction until it discharges into the Indian Ocean about 20 kilometres southwest of Onslow. The river length is about 680 kilometres, with the river basin covering an area of approximately 66,900 square kilometres and includes the towns of Paraburdoo and Tom Price. We crossed the Ashburton River at Nanyutara Roadhouse, surrounded by a large cattle station of the same name. The roadhouse is a fully self-sufficient operation, providing and generating its own electricity and water sourced and treated, as well as treating all sewage and general waste. Fresh food and all other stock is road freighted to the roadhouse from Perth, as was the case at the Overlander Roadhouse, while fuel is supplied from Port Hedland, 600 kilometres to the north. The roadhouse is open all year round, even operating in temperatures over 50 degrees in summer. Once we turned onto the Onslow Road, we passed quite a few heavy vehicles in varying lengths, from double, triple and quad trailers, some coming from the quarry near the turnoff. Thankfully, most were travelling in the opposite direction, or we just followed along behind. The air they push around, especially at speed, was something. We were surprised by the turning lanes that often continued as passing lanes as we passed the turn, something we had not encountered before. We were back in termite country again, with some of the biggest and reddest mounds to date. Not far from Onslow, at the Petey Muller turnoff, construction began in earnest. It was road building on an enormous scale. Massive road and infrastructure construction for the new private 150 kilometre long sealed and fenced haul road from pit to ship to accommodate the trucks carrying ore from the Kenmore mine to the port of Ashburton, through tunnels at the Northwest Coastal Highway and Onslow Road to avoid interaction with public vehicles. The haul road has been specially designed to support the planned conversion of Mineral Resources custom-designed 330-tonne road trains to autonomous operation by a series of roadside monitoring bases positioned alongside the roadway. We passed the MRL truck maintenance facility, workshops needed to service the automated trucks. It was a huge operation. Near the roadworks we passed over salt fields built in the late 1990s, and with the first shipments of salt beginning in 2001. The salt field was built by enclosing a vast natural flat area facing the Indian Ocean with sea-wall levees, allowing management of brine flow efficiently, consisting of 6 evaporation ponds of 77 square kilometres and 15 crystalliser ponds of 10 square kilometres, all closely interconnected and gravity fed. Fully saturated brine is stored in the last evaporation pond before being fed into the larger crystalliser ponds, allowing the salt field to utilise the area efficiently and operate a productive harvesting operation. The Onslow salt operation spans over 90 square kilometres, having processing facilities, a salt washing plant, a stockpile area, as well as the port. The facility exports approximately 2.7 million tonnes of sodium chloride each year to manufacturers in Japan and other Asian countries. The impressive salt jetty extends nearly 1.3 kilometres out into the Indian Ocean and is a prominent feature at Sunset Beach, and is large enough to berth ships up to 55,000 deadweight tonnage, the maximum weight a ship can carry when fully loaded, including cargo, fuel, water, provisions and crew, making it an ideal exporter for customers that require large quantities of salt. It was an interesting process, and I was amazed at just how huge it was. On arriving in Onslow, we set up in the caravan park before taking a walk up to Bearden Point, featuring a spectacular sculpture based on the insignia of the ADF's Rising Sun cap badge. The War Memorial at the end of 2nd Avenue is an impressive reminder that the Japanese actually bombed Onslow in 1943. We then took a stroll along the elevated Ian Blair Memorial Walk from Bearden Point across sand dunes to the excellent vantage point on Sunset Beach, where we could watch the ships loading salt from the salt jetty. The walk commemorates Ian Blair, a West Australian policeman, for his contribution to the Onslow community, having been posted to Onslow in 1959, and where he lived after his retirement until his death in 1998. We enjoyed walking around the point, past the remains of the old jetty, a jagged collection of remnants which is all that is left of a jetty built in 1925. The original jetty was 1.2 kilometres in length, but was badly damaged by a cyclone in 1934, and then again in 1961, when a further 300 metres was removed. Finally, it was destroyed by the Army in 1982. We walked out onto Sunset Beach and stood alongside the towering salt loading jetty before continuing back to town along Back Beach Road, past an osprey's nest high on a pole, to Simpson Street. From Simpson Street we walked towards Bearden Beach, past the community gardens and further on to 2nd Avenue, where we had a look around. We then made our way towards 1st Avenue that runs along the beach, past paparazzi dogs, 4 bronze dogman sculptures uniquely positioned to photograph the stairway to the moon phenomenon, where the full moon rises over exposed tidal flats on Onslow's front beach. The paparazzi dogs are strategically positioned to be looking out across the water to soak up the spectacular skies and colours of sunrise. Onslow is one of only a few places where the sun rises and sets over water, so Rick and I made the most of our stay, getting up early to catch the sunrise and staying on at Bearden Point to watch the sunset behind the salt jetty. It intrigues me just how the colours can change as you look from the west to the east and from minute to minute. The colours gradually change until the sun falls below the horizon or peaks over the horizon in the morning. It was well worth standing and watching. The following day we made our way out past the roadworks to the turn-off to the port of Ashburton, on past the Wheatstone Gas and Oil Project and the Onslow Salt operation that have contributed to the redevelopment of this small town, to the ruins of the old Onslow town site. The old Onslow port was built at the mouth of the Ashburton River to export wool from the Pilbara sheep stations, with Old Onslow gazetted nearby in October 1885. In the early days of settlement, good pearls were found in the Exmouth Gulf, and the town became the home port to a fleet of pearling luggers. From the onset, the situation of the port created difficulties, especially during wet season, when the Ashburton River carried such a huge volume of water that safe mooring for ships was not always possible, and claypans near the town site were often flooded. 3 jetties were constructed to try to alleviate these problems, but the first was destroyed in a cyclone in 1897. The second and third jetties were affected by silting. This led to the construction of a new jetty 18 kilometres away at Bearden Point, and ultimately the relocation of the town in 1925, just over 40 years later. Unfortunately, moving the town did not change the effects of the region's cyclone. We visited Old Onslow, 18 kilometres south, where we found the remains of the original town site at the mouth of the Ashburton River. Many of the old buildings were still visible, including the police station, cemetery, and old jetty. The original town was built around an Aboriginal well, with the township springing up around it. Old Onslow was surrounded by flatlands and desert, and was an oasis in the wilderness, founded on the edge of a flat claypan, suitable for teams coming in from the surrounding districts to deliver wool for shipment. Pastoralists would dump their wool at the wool dump located near the store and tram terminus, where it was compacted into bales, stamped with the pastoralist name and readied for export to markets in England. However, the forces of Mother Nature made Onslow's time short-lived. With a rapidly silting river, large ships could no longer dock to load and unload goods, spelling economic doom for the town. In 1925, a new jetty opened at Bearden Point, 22.5 kilometres north. A year later, the town people relocated many of its buildings, leaving behind a ghost town. All portable buildings were moved mostly by camel train. It is hard to imagine just how tough life would have been in the early days of the town, so remote and isolated, especially during the wet season. Even with the discovery of gold in the Ashburton River in the 1890s giving the town a brief boost, the town would still have been a struggle. Only the old stone and cement buildings like the post office, police station, jail, and very little of the hospital remain. The stonework of the buildings was incredible, even down to the shells embedded in them. There were many relics, most notably piles of bottles scattered around the lonely settlement, along with some rusty metal frames and wheels. The town had been constructed on a grid system, with 6 blocks to the east and west, and 6 blocks to the north and south. We stopped and read the signs which gave details and information about each site. The police station ruins, built in 1893 as a combination of police station, court, jail and quarters for 2 policemen and their families, was an interesting piece of colonial history, as was the remnants of the old post and telegraph office. The Hurley brothers, having arrived from South Australia with their mother in about 1884, established themselves as blacksmiths and carpenters, constructing many of the buildings at the time, including sheds, homesteads, and the Mechanics' Institute Hall. They were also involved in the town affairs, as well as taking on the pastoral lease of Dimanor Station. Driving around Old Onslow was challenging in places, with the very soft sand nearly getting bogged, but the boat was up to the challenge. I take my hat off to the teamsters, including Afghans who drove camels through the outback sand. Camels are better at surviving droughts than other team animals, and provided service to pastoralists and contributed to the defence of the British Empire, carrying urgently needed copper and lead out of inland mines to Onslow Port, to be shipped to London via Singapore during the Second World War. The date palms are thought to have originated from seeds left behind by the Afghan cameleers. The town also had a clay tennis court constructed in 1885, but later considered too far out of town and rebuilt closer to the centre. The Mechanical Institute Hall replaced the church hall that was destroyed by a cyclone in 1909 and was one of the last buildings to be relocated in 1926, reassembled 8 months later, and now stands surrounded by the Shire of Ashburton's offices and library. We spent the remainder of the afternoon enjoying the sunset from Bearden Point before making our way back to Gidget in the boat. Though Onslow is off the northwest coastal highway, this coastal town on the edge of the Indian Ocean, surrounded by a number of rivers, tidal flats, ponds and watercourses, was such an interesting place to visit that even now, months later, I shake my head at how remote, but also how important it is for the area. How it still remains after being hit by numerous cyclones over the years, hence the name Cyclone City, and the site of a bombing run by the Japanese during the Second World War. Onslow was actively involved in World War II as it acted as a base for the Navy, and after the war continued to be used by the Navy to conduct tests on the nearby island. People sure are tough to live here. The ruins of old Onslow, even after all these years withstanding Mother Nature, shows just how sturdy and durable some of the buildings were back then. Having to rebuild after the numerous cyclones that have demolished Onslow, along with the shifting sand and silt deposited around the Ashburton River mouth, it was something to marvel at. I wonder if all the new infrastructure is going to be as hardy. The next day would be a travelling day as we leave Onslow and make our way towards Dampier. Join us next time as we continue further north, where again I am amazed by the length of the trains carrying ore to the port, the size of the container ships, and the time needed to fill each one, and I get to see my first Sturt Desert pea. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Give us a thumbs up if you did. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now. Rick and Rosemary. R&R, living life.